morning, everyone, and welcome to the 9th SEARCA Online Learning and Virtual Engagement Webinar, or SOLVE for short. This SOLVE webinar series is SEARCA's immediate response to the emerging impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on food security, nutrition security, and health security by maximizing the use of information and communication technology platforms to inform, educate, and share evidence-based solutions and tested technologies, as well as best practices on the ground. My name is Kim Bantayan, and I am a program specialist of the Training for Development Unit of the Education and Collective Learning Department. The video shown earlier has given you a glimpse about SEARCA and what we do, but if I may add, SEARCA is hosted by the Philippine government on the campus of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, Laguna. So we are coming to you live from the Special Science and Nature City of the Philippines. SEARCA's past 7 SOLVE webinars dealt with addressing food and nutrition insecurity in the time of COVID-19 pandemic through home and containerized gardening, school plus home gardens, sustainable agricultural intensification, and open systems agricultural mechanization. Last week, we started our webinar series focusing on the OneHealth, EcoHealth approach in solving emerging diseases, where we invited a distinguished panel of speakers who gave us an overview of the OneHealth, EcoHealth approach, since the concept is relatively new to most of our online viewers, and highlighted the urgent need for a cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary collaborations to develop a more holistic approach to health among different stakeholders at the human, animal, and environment interface. But before we proceed to our online conversation this morning, please allow me to just quickly go over some very interesting statistics gathered from our SOLVE webinar held last week, June 17, 2020. The infograph shows that 67% of our online viewers last week were female and the rest were male. This data has been consistent with the figures gathered over the past 8 SOLVE webinars that we've had, where women consistently dominated our online attendees. The infograph also indicates that more than 200 individuals tuned in via Zoom, while more than 600 viewed the webinar through SEARCA's Facebook page. And lastly, we are happy to note that we've had online attendees not only from the Philippines, but also from Burkina Faso, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, Nigeria, United Kingdom, United States, and United Arab Emirates. This shows the number of individuals and countries that SEARCA's webinar has reached so far. We are trying our best to be able to reach as many individuals, farmers, and farming communities as possible through this online platform, and really make a difference in the lives of our stakeholders, especially in this COVID-19 era. Now, going back to today's webinar, you will see today's lineup of speakers on your screen. After my introduction and a few housekeeping points, our first speaker, Dr. Michele de Garine-Wichatitsky, I hope I pronounced that right, Michele, will discuss from OneHealth, EcoHealth to socio-ecological systems health, or SESH, framing issues and implications. Dr. Aurelie Binot follows with a topic on an approach to territorial health within a OneHealth framework. And for our last speaker, we will have Dr. Ronnie Domingo, who will make a presentation on African swine fever in the Philippines and the potential of OneHealth approach. The question and answer session follows at the end of all the presentations. Before we begin with the webinar, please allow me to cover a few housekeeping points or reminders. During the presentations, we invite all of you to send in your questions via the comment section. If you are watching us through SEARCA's Facebook page, if you are registered and tuned in via Zoom, please post your questions or comments in the Q&A section that you see at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on the gadget you are using. We will collate the questions, and once we are in the Q&A session, our speakers will address them in the time remaining. May we request you to kindly locate or to kindly indicate your location in our country of origin. It would be good for us to know where you are watching this webinar. We encourage you to please like SEARCA's Facebook page now by pressing the little thumbs up sign just below the cover photo for us to remain socially connected. By liking our Facebook page, you will regularly receive updates on our learning events, webinars, and postings on recent developments in agricultural and rural development. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on SEARCA's Facebook page and YouTube channel. You may also subscribe to SEARCA's YouTube channel. Today's presentations will be made available on SEARCA's website at www.searca.org. The slides shown during the past 8 webinars have already been posted on our website. If you have issues or are experiencing technical difficulties with the Zoom online platform, please email my colleagues at solve@searca.org. I repeat, please email my colleagues at solve@searca.org if you are encountering any technical difficulty. Let us now move on to our first speaker this morning, Dr. Michele. Michele is a senior researcher of CIRAD, Thailand. He is also a research professor of the Department of Veterinary Public Health, Kasetsart University. He has a background in ecology and veterinary science, and his career focused on applied research and academic training for development and conservation in tropical regions such as Southern Africa, South Pacific, and Southeast Asia. Over to you, Michele.
Good morning. So thank you for the introduction, and you did very well in pronouncing my very complicated name. So my name is Michele de Garine-Wichatitsky, as you said. I'm French, but I'm currently speaking from Bangkok, where I've been based for the past 4 years. This morning, I would like to share, and my presentation would be actually following up on the last week's presentation about OneHealth. And I will move straight on to my slideshow. So what I wanted to share with you is a follow-up from last week's presentation, and especially I will try to give you a quick overview of how OneHealth, EcoHealth moved to widen the perspective into including socio-ecological system perspective. And this has a number of implications, which I will try to highlight, both theoretical, practical, but also for the governance of health and environmental management. So I'll just start also maybe we'll discuss that during the question and answer session at the end, but I am personally interested in understanding why is SEARCA paying so much attention to OneHealth, EcoHealth? And maybe this will be part of the discussion at the end of the presentation. A brief overview of the context. We must realize that, as was said earlier, OneHealth, EcoHealth is relatively new, although it's been developing over the past 2 decades. And it's actually a very big change that has undergone by public health and veterinary public health. And it started to try to have a more holistic and more society-inclusive management of health. So the scope started with really looking at zoonotic diseases, understanding how diseases that have got an animal reservoir or vector-borne diseases, which also have vectors involved in the epidemiology. This required having more integrated approaches with veterinarian, ecologist, and also public health. And then slowly the scope increased, including emerging diseases from wildlife, but also from livestock, And you are, of course, very much aware of the implications that this can have with the terrible COVID-19 crisis. I understand that you had a lecture specifically on that last week, so I will not specifically talk about COVID-19 this time. But the perspective is actually wider than that. And OneHealth, EcoHealth also look at all the interlinkages between biodiversity and health, nature and health and well-being of the people, talking about notions like environmental justice, addressing issues linked with pollutions, for instance. And in the end, it's not just the health of the people, of the animal, or the ecosystems, but the scope is really looking at the whole planet. So this means that OneHealth started initially by looking at some of the three components: humans, animals, and the environment. And by addressing these questions, its specific questions are looking at interactions between the health component of human and animal. As I mentioned earlier, for instance, zoonotic diseases really mobilize different disciplines like human medicine, veterinary medicine, but also comparative medicine. And if you want to understand that for wild animals, you have to mobilize knowledge from ecology or biology to move on. So that's where it started. OneHealth is embedded actually in EcoHealth, but there has been a multiplicity, a lot of different approaches with different names, always starting with or ending with health. And I'm not going to detail all the different approaches. But I wanted to emphasize that starting from these three different components, the health component of the environment, of animals or humans, but including these in a wider perspective, which is the whole socio-ecological system, which is really what planetary health and the latest development of OneHealth and EcoHealth are trying to do. This has a lot of implications. First of all, it's really referring to one notion which is very important in sustainability science, which is the notion of resilience, where you understand the whole world as being represented by a system with a social component and an ecological component. And these ones are intricately linked. There are a lot of retroactions between the different components. So by framing health with these questions of resilience and socio-ecological system health, we are not just describing new ways of looking at, for instance, ecosystem health or global health, or looking at different component specific interactions between animal health or human health, for instance, or the environment and human health, which would be related to global health, for instance, or EcoHealth was addressing questions about the economic environment and how this is influencing human health. All these approaches could be qualified as health of a different component within a socio-ecological system. But this is to be quite different from the health of the whole socio-ecological system, which is the notion of resilience. And I will try to explain why this is very important, and it has a lot of implications on how we should address these questions. So, as mentioned earlier, this is the OneHealth, and including the whole components of health in this framework of resilience is actually calling for the mobilization of different sciences, what we call sustainability science. And all our colleagues who are involved in environmental management are very familiar with sustainability science, which actually includes a lot of additional discipline to the ones I just mentioned on this graph about OneHealth. So from a multidisciplinary, even interdisciplinary perspective, there was a need to move on to what we call transdisciplinarity. And this is because when we talk about this complex notion of health in a socio-ecological system, we are talking with multiple and legitimate point of view about how you define the health of the different components and the health of the world socio-ecological system. There is a lot of literature that has been dedicated to this kind of approaches, starting from the definition of the socio-ecological systems, defining why these problems are difficult to solve, because there is not one single way of formulating the problem. So there are many different, there is not one answer, there are many different perspectives, many different answers to a problem. This is what you call the wicked problem. And you cannot experiment because it's always changing and it's very difficult to, to have a single perspective. And it's calling for a different approach of doing science. You cannot just experiment on your system. You also have to define it with the different actors and understand that this is a subjective. It's only one way of finding the consensus about this notion. It seems very abstract, but in fact, and indeed, there is a lot of literature that has discussed that. But in fact, it has a lot of implications. And one of them is a problem, a possible pitfall in the governance and the institutions that we will mobilize for managing health and environment. One of these issues is that it's been described quite well in the literature for management of environment, where there is a mismatch between the scale at which the ecological or the social processes happen that drive, in our case, would be disease emergence, for instance, and spread, and the scale at which the epidemiological surveillance or the effective health or nature management should occur. This is happening, and it's precluding the necessary adaptive governance of this linked socio-ecological system to make sure that governance is aligned with the processes they are trying to manage. One of the implications is that there is clearly a need for local, adaptive, and intersectorial interventions. And I understand that you had mentions during the previous lectures about OneHealth, how important it is to make sure that the different sectors can work together. This is especially difficult in the case of health, where very often health or environmental services are quite centralized and organized in silos. And one of the challenges when you adopt these OneHealth and socio-ecosystem health approaches is really to make sure that you can develop local dialogue with the different stakeholders and the different agencies that are in charge. Specifically for health, one additional problem at international level may be that currently the OneHealth concept is spearheaded by 3 UN agencies, and we believe that it would be more efficient if you could include one agency that is really dedicated to health, to environment or biodiversity, which would allow a better integration of the different components in the socio-ecosystem health perspective. The third implications is that because there is a need for these transdisciplinary approaches, it's absolutely crucial to make sure that there are arenas and tools that are mobilized to co-define both the whole framework. I mean, there is not one way of deciding what OneHealth is. So it needs to be done with the different stakeholders, with the different participant actors, including the local communities and the other local stakeholders like NGOs or government organizations. And this requires mobilization of specific tools like participatory approaches. And you had an intervention by Dr. Panomsak Promburum from Chiang Mai University last week, detailing companion modeling. That's a very good example, but there are other ones that we need to mobilize to both co-design, implement, and monitor the intervention that will be performed using this kind of approaches. These were three main points, which I think are consequences, direct consequences of the latest developments of the One Health, EcoHealth, and especially the inclusion of the notion of resilience, socio-ecosystem health framework. Having said that, this framework is extremely flexible and very well adapted to try to accompany a wide range of management interventions in health, environmental, biodiversity, and agriculture, which is really in the scope of SEARCA. And this is actually what we are currently doing with a project on healthy ecosystem in Southeast Asia, Ecology, where we will mobilize these ideas of the interlinkages between the health components and the health of the whole landscape, the whole environment, with starting with management of pigs in Laos. And we're hoping that we can also develop similar activities in the Philippines, where the African swine fever outbreak is actually having terrible consequences, both on the animal health, obviously on the pigs, on people's health with the secondary consequences, but also on the environment and including the biodiversity, the local endemic pigs. So we think it would be a very, very good entry point to try to develop these integrated approaches, and we look forward to these developments. I will just mention also that's an introduction to the next presentation by my colleague Aurelie Binot, where we are mobilizing these ideas of the different components of health and the socio-ecosystem health to look at the health of a territory. And she will be presenting more in details a project that will be starting very soon in West Africa. So before I leave the ground, I want to go back to my initial question. Why would SEARCA pay attention to One Health, EcoHealth? Well, if you are an academic, one good reason would be that this is extremely mainstream. I mean, a lot of papers are actually calling for One Health, EcoHealth approaches to solve COVID-19 crisis. So this may be one reason, but I hope after that presentation, you may have other arguments saying why EcoHealth and especially socio-ecosystem health approaches may be of use to SEARCA and the different participants to this webinar. I thank you for your attention and leave the ground.
Thank you very much, Michele, for your very interesting presentation on the need for local, adaptive, cross-sectoral intervention that includes local communities and stakeholders, and also that requires the need for participatory approaches and tools like the companion modeling that was taken up during last week's webinar. For our next speaker, thank you so much. We'll get back to you, Michele, for the question and answer. Great. For our next speaker, we have Dr. Aurelie Binot. Please note that Dr. Binot's presentation has been pre-recorded due to time difference between our two countries. It is 4 a.m. in France, where she is currently based. So while waiting for Dr. Aurelie Binot's PowerPoint presentation to be shared on screen, please allow me to share a little bit about our next speaker. Dr. Binot is a researcher at CIRAD and is hosted as adjunct professor at Kasetsart University Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. Her scientific background is tropical agronomy and social anthropology. She is involved in several multidisciplinary research projects for a better understanding of health risks perceptions across sectors, agriculture, health, and the environment, and for the implementation of participatory approaches within a One Health, EcoHealth framework, merging social, epidemiological, and environmental dynamics. She is the coordinator of the Europe Aid Come Across project under the EU One Health program in Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Aurelie Binot.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Aurelie Binot. I'm a researcher at CIRAD, based in France, but I've been working with Southeast Asian colleagues for the last 9 years in the framework of Greece Research Network, notably. I will give you a presentation remotely today. Excuse me for this. I am in France and we are not allowed to travel anymore. But I hope that my colleague Michele de Garine will answer the questions you may have. And I hope that you will enjoy this presentation, even if I'm not with you. Sorry for that. So we will continue talking about integrated approach to health and how it can be operational and implemented at field level. So regarding this integrated approach to health, instead of talking about One Health, EcoHealth, planetary health, or whatever, maybe we could have a look at what is beyond all this and at the socio-ecological processes that are impacting health at the level of socio-ecological systems. So this sociological process disturbing or impacting health, maybe increasing urbanization, intensification of trade and farming systems, drastic land change, land use change, all these processes that are affecting the drivers of health risk emergence, notably in Southeast Asia. So these, taking these into consideration and addressing this socio-ecological process, call for a better integration between animal health and public health sectors, but also social and environmental science and agriculture, including livestock production, so that we can address associated health issues. So it really calls for an integrated, cross-sectorial, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and multi-stakeholders approach. You may have already discussed with Michele about the diversity of interpretation of the One Health framework and how it can be implemented and conceived on different ways about One Health, etc. Here, we will not be talking specifically about One Health, but rather about territory health and how to promote healthy territories so we can improve animal health, human health for sure, but also ecosystem health. So this may be quite relevant if we look at the current health crisis, the COVID-19 crisis that we are facing now globally. This current health crisis is an acute reminder of how exposed and vulnerable our societies are to the emergence of new pathogens. And by extension, how vulnerable we are to the risks that are associated with global changes, increase in croplands, erosion of biodiversity, climate change, etc. This crisis calls really for a fresh look at the interdependencies between environments and societies. It's not just necessary to describe and understand these interdependencies or the interactions between environment, biodiversity, society, ways of production, value chains, etc. But we should also take into account and act in a context of great uncertainty so we can better prevent the crisis of tomorrow. In this context, the health sector can no longer be considered independently of agricultural and environmental dynamics. It must be really closely taken into account, and maybe it's the opportunity now to highlight how maybe One Health framework did not so far really include this agricultural dimension and as environmental dimension, even if it is very well highlighted and always in the rhetoric, always present. In the facts and in the implementation of actions, these environmental and agricultural dimensions remain at local level and even at national level, not enough taken into consideration. For this, the framework of OneHealth should be really linked very explicitly to the agro-ecological transition framework. So if we better link OneHealth framework and agroecology transition, agro-ecological framework, the change in practice within an agroecological transition, it will be possible to define and improve global health at the scale of a territory, so at very local level, and really impacting local population at risk, and agricultural producers, farmers, herders, etc. So it can contribute to the implementation of sustainable and resilient agrosystems. So we are now talking about socio-ecosystems, where the main activities are linked to the agriculture sector, and how we can improve health of all the components of this system. So although this health issue is very prevalent in the debates concerning the challenge of the agroecological transition, the impacts of agroecological transition on health at local level are not really measured. And at this level, we don't have proof of evidence about the linkage, the links, the interactions between agroecological transition and improvement of health. Moreover, local actors, and especially women or marginalized groups, are not really involved in that type of assessment, and in the assessment of how agricultural practices are impacting health and healthy territories. So what we propose, and I will now present you an ongoing project, a project that we are currently developing actually, and that is in the pipe for donors. What we propose is to consider that the desirable state of health of a given territory should be defined by the local actors. So health could be really conceived and perceived and addressed as a common. So the activities, agricultural, farming, livestock breeding activities, etc., should be considered as a common, and the change in this practice, the change in knowledge of the different farmers, producers, etc., the change of interactions among the different actors of a territory should be considered within the framework of the agroecological transition, but considering what is the level of health that the stakeholders of the territory want to gain. So the definition and implementation of actions should be the result of concerted efforts of consultation on a shared and co-constructed vision of a desirable future for all. So all the actors of the territory should be deciding together what is their vision of the future that they want. And so it will be really anchored in the realities and in the dynamics at local level of the territory. So with this project, the Healthy Territories project, we propose to accompany the transition, the agroecological transition, the change in practice, etc., by mobilizing participatory science and also a transdisciplinary framework. So then experts and scientists can support local population, actors of civil society, the public authorities, and could define ad hoc objectives as well as sets of feasible actions to be carried out, and also co-construct indicators that will reflect the impact of this action. So such an approach makes sense in a context where climate change is continually disrupting socio-ecological processes at the interface between agriculture and the environment. And of course, with all the impacts that it has on human and animal health, and also on the dynamics of territorial development. So such an approach would enable vulnerable social groups to be involved also in the process in order to fully understand, for example, gender issues and how we can consider gender issues in agroecological transition, but also in changing practice that will increase and improve the health at global level in a territory. As an inclusive approach, it allows for the appropriation of the problems and measures that are taken by the actors themselves and reinforce the sustainability of the proposed solutions. So to achieve this inclusive approach, we will rely on the implementation of living laboratories. At this level, the health of the territory in relation to the stakes of the agroecological transition can be considered as a complex notion that represents more than environmental, plant, animal, and human health together. So we will consider the different properties and attributes of all of these compartments, environmental, plant, animal, human health, within the socio-ecological system. But we will also consider the interactions between these compartments, and we will also consider how these interactions lead to the emergence of properties that are really defining the health of territories, properties such as resilience, such as productivity, such as security, such as, also, for example, connectivity of a territory. So all these emerging properties will be promoted at the level of these living laboratories. As an inclusive approach, it allows for the appropriation of the problems and measures that are taken by the actors themselves and reinforce the sustainability of the proposed solutions. So to achieve this inclusive approach, we will rely on the implementation of living laboratories. At this level, the health of the territory in relation to the stakes of the agroecological transition can be considered as a complex notion that represents more than environmental, plant, animal, and human health together. So we will consider the different properties and attributes of all of these compartments, environmental, plant, animal, human health, within the socio-ecological system. But we will also consider the interactions between these compartments, and we will also consider how these interactions lead to the emergence of properties that are really defining the health of territories, properties such as resilience, such as productivity, such as security, such as, also, for example, connectivity of a territory. So all these emerging properties will be promoted at the level of these living laboratories. In a nutshell, the project will aim to improve the well-being of local population within the framework of this integrated approach to health and at local territorial scale through the establishment of sustainable agrosystems. So it means that we will aim at strengthening the skills and means of local actors so they can better adapt to the hazards and areas that are affecting their health in connection with the agricultural activities, but also that we will accompany them so they can collectively reveal and identify what are the attributes and indicators of the global health of their territory in the context of climate change, for example. And we can then better understand and manage health issues that are related to agriculture and environmental management. It means also that we will explore with local producers the modalities of transition to agroecology, leading to an improved global health of the territory. In a nutshell, the project will aim to improve the well-being of local population within the framework of this integrated approach to health and at local territorial scale through the establishment of sustainable agrosystems. So it means that we will aim at strengthening the skills and means of local actors so they can better adapt to the hazards and areas that are affecting their health in connection with the agricultural activities, but also that we will accompany them so they can collectively reveal and identify what are the attributes and indicators of the global health of their territory in the context of climate change, for example. And we can then better understand and manage health issues that are related to agriculture and environmental management. It means also that we will explore with local producers the modalities of transition to agroecology, leading to an improved global health of the territory. So this project will be implemented on 4 main field sites, 2 in West Africa, in Senegal and in Benin, and 2 in Southeast Asia, in Laos and in Cambodia. So these are very different contexts for implementation, but on each of them, we have some health issues that should be addressed within a One Health framework. And we are also in local context where agroecology is really needed because the impacts of agricultural activities on health of farmers and animals are really bad because of intensive practice, for example, or because of the presence of a lot of pathogens in the system. In complement to this set of field sites and intervention that we will implement, we will also set up a community of practice, and the objective is to exchange with other projects, so projects that will be funded by themselves, and not by this healthy territory project, but just to connect with them. So the objective of this connection in the framework of a community of practice, the setup of this cluster of projects, is to exchange with actors linking a local One Health approach with the agroecological transition. There are maybe other projects, and we know there are other projects that are already explicitly addressing this connection between agroecological transition and One Health. And so we will focus on the sharing of conceptual frameworks, sharing tools, sharing methodological approaches, sharing trainings and different capacity building initiatives, and also cross-cutting scientific events. So we can involve also non-academic actors. And the objective is really to disseminate the innovations that the Healthy Territories project will promote or will bring, but also to share knowledge about other innovations. So the final result will be hopefully to improve the capacities and skills of local actors to take into account health and agriculture interactions. The project Healthy Territories will adopt an iterative and adaptive approach. So we can co-design the issues, and we can co-design the implementation of adapted solutions to these issues. So we will for sure be based on participatory approach, companion approach that will allow the implementation of tools for local consultation and coordination. This participatory approach and tools will allow the analysis of production systems. We will then better understand the socio-economic dynamics, the public policies and institutions that should be mobilized in our approach. And the key of this approach will be the implementation of living laboratories. So in these living laboratories, the stakeholders will co-construct and experiment with consultation frameworks and activities so they can boost the agroecological transition specific to their territory in relation to the health issues that will be identified there. The project Healthy Territories will adopt an iterative and adaptive approach. So we can co-design the issues, and we can co-design the implementation of adapted solutions to these issues. So we will for sure be based on participatory approach, on companion approach that will allow the implementation of tools for local consultation and coordination. This participatory approach and tools will allow the analysis of production systems. We will then better understand the socio-economic dynamics, the public policies and institutions that should be mobilized in our approach. And the key of this approach will be the implementation of living laboratories. So in these living laboratories, the stakeholders will co-construct and experiment with consultation frameworks and activities so they can boost the agro-ecological transition specific to their territory in relation to the health issues that will be identified there. In order to implement these living laboratories, we will have to mobilize different types of skills. So there are 4 main axes for these competencies and skills package. The first one is skills needed to assess the impact of agricultural practice on health, and also to co-construct indicators really highlighting and explaining and measuring the health impacts of agriculture at territory level. The second package of skills, the second axis, is the skills for participatory approach implementation, companion approach, how we can accompany the different actors, how we can set up consultation frameworks that will enable the implementation of these living laboratories. The third axis will be dealing with data management, information system, and how we can capitalize all the knowledge that will be produced during the project. So this data, this information will be available for the people involved in the living laboratories. So the experimentation can be implemented on the basis of relevant data and information. And the fourth axis will be dealing with the animation of a community of practice that I already mentioned, but how we can really make the facilitation, the animation, how we can have scientific events, how we can, communicate and make the dissemination of knowledge and data and tools, etc., at the level of the cluster of projects, and also at the level of the living laboratories. So finally, we think that such an approach, linking OneHealth framework to agro-ecological transition, should be really contributing to a better preparedness of new emerging risks at the agriculture, environmental, and health nexus. And so looking in the future and trying to be better prepared for the next health crisis or environmental crisis or even climate crisis that are coming. Stakeholders, local actors at the level of territories will be better prepared and also better, how can I say, they will have the skills to address the impacts of their actions, and in particular actions linked to value chains and agricultural system. So better link the impacts of their actions to the state of health of their local system, and so they can change and promote these agro-ecological practices, so they will contribute to improve health of their local system and of their territory. So thank you very much for your attention. This presentation that I recorded is the result of a collective work. So we are a team of people involving Michele also that is with you today. We are all with partners in Senegal, in Benin, in Laos, in Cambodia, and in Ivory Coast and in the Caribbean areas as well. A lot of colleagues, all this network of colleagues who are actively contributing to the setup of this project and the development of the proposal. So for sure, we will pay attention to continue communicating about this project, and once it starts, to share the results and share the lessons learned, thanks to the existing network and especially CIRCA. So thank you very much for this invitation of contributing to this workshop. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and don't hesitate to come back to me by email if you have specific questions. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much, Aurelie. It's been a pleasure to have you with us this morning. Thank you also for your presentation, which takes a look at implementing a socio-ecological approach to health within the framework of the agro-ecological transition. And this framework, and through this framework, it will be possible to improve the overall health at the territory or at the local level, contributing to the implementation of sustainable agro-ecosystems. And thank you also for sharing with us your current project activities that focus on the interaction or the relationship between agriculture and health, and hopefully be able to gather enough information or generate knowledge on the impact of agricultural practices on health. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our last, but certainly not the least speaker this morning. Our speaker is currently the Director of the Bureau of Animal Industry of the Department of Agriculture. So the screen is yours, Dr. Ronnie Domingo.
Thank you very much, Madam Kim Bantayan. Thank you for CIRCA for the opportunity to share with our audience on what's happening with African swine fever in the Philippines. And thank you also for the information you shared a while ago that almost 70% of the participants in this webinar are women. Congratulations to the women. I have 30 slides, and I should be I should have this rate of 2 slides per minute so that I could finish the presentation in 15 minutes. I assure you that I will have a brief presentation. My speech mentor told me that you should speak briefly so that you will be invited again. Okay, let's proceed with the presentation. This is the ASF situation, and this was prepared by my staff working on the control of the African swine fever disease. For our participants coming from other countries, you know, the Philippine swine industry is 65% coming from the small holder systems. And at the moment, we have around 12 million swine in the Philippines. And I would say that pork is the favorite meat in the Philippines. While in chicken, the consumption is 12 kilograms per year per person. For pork, it's 15 kilograms per person per year. According to reports, this swine industry is a 260 billion industry. And if you're going to add the other allied services, it could be as high as 400 billion. The swine industry is a major contributor to the total agricultural production in the Philippines. If you're going to take a look at the Asian occurrence of the African swine fever, what you see on the screen is a map with color codes. The darker the red color, it means the more pigs you see in those areas. And as you can see, China has it's almost colored red. As far as I know, half of the swine produced in the world comes from our region. And the small dots, the yellow dots, the green dots, the orange dots, this indicate the cases of ASF occurrences in Asia. So from this slide, you would see that if there is a pig being raised in the area, you most likely you would expect a case of African swine fever. And we are dealing with a virus that we call a diehard virus. It's highly resistant in the environment. It survives freezing and even the pH levels. If you're going to look at the studies conducted to determine how long could this virus survive, you will see from the list the entry on frozen meat. If this is contaminated with the ASF virus, it says here that the virus could survive for 3 years, 1,000 days. And so for those participants, especially those with the piggeries in the Philippines or in areas with African swine fever outbreaks, you should take note of this viral behavior. You might be tempted to do repopulation, but unknowingly, the virus could still be surviving in the environment. Now, this disease is somewhat similar to other diseases, and you could see that on the right side of the screen. You know? But if you are thinking about how to diagnose ASF or when to suspect ASF, if you have high mortalities and you see hemorrhages on the skin or from the natural openings of the animal, you should start considering ASF, especially if you heard that the disease has entered your province or your region. And take note, according to the Department of Health, African swine fever is not a threat to human health. So you can continue to trust your meat vendors, especially those accredited by the National Meat Inspection Service. They are selling pork and it has no ASF virus. From the experience we had in managing the disease in the Philippines, these are the, should we say, top risk factors, or these are the common routes of the spread of the disease. Swill feeding, in the Philippines, we call this kaning baboy. These are kitchen waste materials fed to the animals. And this is a very common practice among backyard raisers in the Philippines. The movement of animal vehicles or feed vehicles, moving the infected pigs or pork products from one place to another. And take note, it also includes movement of contaminated, especially those farm workers. And fomites, referring to non-living items. Let's say you are borrowing a weighing scale from one farm to another farm. That could be a mechanical carrier of the virus. And we have even received reports that the waterways and the flooding could have contributed to the spread of the disease. Our Filipinos, fellow Filipinos, they love to bring in meat from other countries. And this is another risk factor for the entry of the virus into the Philippines territory. So to simplify what happened to the Philippines, we could say that it started with food waste collected from international flights, from shipping vessels coming from other countries. And food are collected as food wastes, and these are sold to the backyard swine raisers. And this is the practice in a locality near Metro Manila, because the hotels and restaurants, they use, many of them use imported or smuggled pork products. So the outbreak started among backyard raisers in Rizal. using swill feeding systems, and these racers, some of them, they ship their animals to Bulacan, to Quezon City, and from these three regional places, it's spread to other parts of the Philippines. So this is now the color-coded location of African swine fever outbreaks in the Philippines. If it's colored green, then it means it has no reports of ASF. And if you want to buy ASF-free animals, just locate the green-colored areas, and mostly from Visayas and partly from the northern part of Mindanao. As you can see, Luzon is almost colored red. No? So for our foreign guests, Metro Manila is somewhere here. And naturally, the swine farms would be located near Metro Manila. And I'm referring to this region. We call this Central Luzon region. And the lower part is the Southern Tagalog region. So this information is published on the Bureau of Animal Industry website and Facebook page. So you can access this information so that you can, that which should guide your preferences in buying or selling animals. So I will show you a dynamic map of the outbreaks recorded in the Philippines from August to June. And as you can see, this red dots here, this indicate the appearance of the disease according to the months as indicated by this bar, vertical bar. So from February, the cases are increased, and then it reappeared in one part of Mindanao. But after March, the cases declined, possibly due to the restriction movement imposed by the enhanced community quarantine, which was declared in the middle of March. So as of the moment, we have depopulated around 300,000 pigs, and approximately this is 3% of the swine inventory in the Philippines. And we have here a graph of the ASF incidents in the Philippines. If we are going to make a, what do you call that? A line, superimpose a line over these bar graphs, we could see that before the imposition of the enhanced community quarantine in March, we had these two waves of the outbreak. And if you're going to get the average, it's around 60 cases per 1 million pigs. After the imposition of the ECQ, there was restricted movement in many parts of the country. And so that was very favorable in controlling the spread of the disease. So from this level of 60 cases per million pigs, we calculated it was down to 20 cases per million pigs. So from the beginning of the disease situation in Asia, take note that as early as December 2018, we have created a committee, a task force in the Bureau to prepare, to prevent the African swine fever disease entering the Philippine territory. But when we had the outbreak, we created the department-wide crisis management team to handle the situation. And in October 2019, because of the social issues related with the implementation of the control measures, we had to involve the national leadership. That's why we created the National ASF Task Force. And take note, aside from African swine fever, we have other potential transboundary animal diseases. So this year, February 21, the president created the National Task Force on Animal-Borne Diseases. So that should include rabies, ASF, bird flu. So the Philippines is learning from the experience, and we are appropriately adjusting our responses. As you can see, the president is now involved in the elimination of this disease in our territory. We are now using the whole of government approach in dealing with this disease. And this is one lesson we learned from our neighboring countries, the whole of government approach. Briefly, we have here some of the packages, support packages extended by the government to our farmers, especially those affected by the ASF outbreak. And take note, this is a problem that covers a wide because also of the quarantine restrictions. These factors affected our delivery of the cash assistance to the farmers. So we ask for extra patience from our farmers. For those with registered names affected by ASF, and especially if you are a smallholder farmer, we will exert all efforts to bring you the promised indemnification coming from the national government. And in this battle, we really have to mobilize our local and national government employees and officials. So that's why we had to define the roles at different levels. And this we have effectively communicated to our counterparts at the local unit. So what are the cross-cutting issues? This is not simply a disease issue. It's very easy to control ASF because it's a killer virus. You simply need to cull the animal, bury the animal, and that ends the problem. Now, the control is now complicated because of the social issues. So we have listed here the practice of feeding swill to the animals, and even to this day, the farmers still practice this feeding system, even though we have communicated in many circumstances the risks involved in using swill to feed your animals. We have a preference for buying, of course, cheap pork and pork products, and we might be unaware. These products are very cheap because they are coming from animals affected by ASF. Instead of surrendering the animals to the government, the farmers sometimes would tend to sell their sick animals to other places or other consumers. And this aggravates aside from the farmers, we also have these traders exploiting the situation, buying the animals from the affected area and selling them to the other areas. And of course, as you can guess, this helps in spreading the disease. So what's the main lesson? Health threats cannot be addressed effectively by One Health sector alone. That's why our guest speakers, they presented to us the One Health approach. And when we were students, we called it One Medicine. Later on, we heard this EcoHealth word, and somebody later on coined the word One Health. That will be further expounded by Dr. Michele. I assume they have given you a very good definition of the One Health approach. But as you can see, with One Health, this should be multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary, multi-targets, and multi-level. And as you can see, we can involve as many individuals in this common battle so that we could assure we will have a good outcome. We have done this before, and from the slide you could see here at the middle section, we are now involving the Department of Education in our rabies eradication program. So these are the areas where you can involve yourself or your group. And we are, even in the laboratory services, we have involved the private groups, the state colleges and universities. And we elevated the level of cooperation to learn from our international partners, especially those with ASF concern. So at the moment, we are seeing this elevation of the government interventions to eliminate the disease and to be able to, in the shortest possible time, restore the swine industry in the Philippines. So these are the actions. If you are interested to join the Philippine government or the private groups, these are the areas where you can be involved. So we are stronger when we use the One Health approach. So in summary, our problem requires One Health approach. We have tried to mainstream One Health in the Philippines in the past, and this synergism must be sustained, and every citizen, especially those participating in this webinar, are encouraged to apply the One Health approach in your area of influence. That's all. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ronnie Domingo, for your highly informative information enhancing our understanding of the current ASF, African swine fever situation in the Philippines. So for our online viewers, if you want to know more about African swine fever, please visit their website. They have their own Facebook page also. So it is good to know, Director, that the Department of Education is also is now involved in your One Health activities in response to the control of ASF in the country. So thank you very much to all our speakers. We now move on to the exciting part of our webinar this morning. So may I remind our online attendees to please start typing your questions now in the comment section, including your location or country of origin. So if you are tuned in via Zoom, please post your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom or top of your screen. The first question is directed to Dr. Michele. Michele, the question is, do either One Health or EcoHealth approach replace the traditional health as discipline? So is it now obsolete to talk about public health?
In fact, I don't really like using the different terms, One Health, EcoHealth, public health, whatever. I think it's more because then you try to stick to currents or school of thoughts, and then you get into endless debates of trying to link the different components. What I think is really important is to go back maybe to the last slide presented by Dr. Ronnie, where it's more about the principles that you have to apply. Interdisciplinarity, so as many disciplines as possible should address, it's not as many as possible, but it's the relevant ones. And to understand that when you talk about One Health, you have to clearly define what is the problem, not just by technicians or academics, but also with the end users, which would be, farmers or the different citizens. If you keep these principles, then you will see that public health is perfectly relevant in most of these situations, but it has to take the perspective of defining the problems and then adding the different components and the different disciplines to work together, the different sectors, to address a specific problem that has been defined with participatory approaches. And then you'll see that public health, veterinary public health, ecology, and all the different sectors are actually relevant for One Health.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is first define the problem, and then all these different sectors coming in together to respond or to resolve the issues or and other problems that may come in. Okay, so the next question is to Dr. Domingo. Is EcoHealth or One Health approach now integrated in the veterinary medicine or animal science education?
I used to teach in the university, and in the subject zoonosis and veterinary epidemiology, we always include the topic on the One Health approach. For the veterinary education, I'm sure it's already part of the teaching topics. For the
Okay.
other professional courses, I guess we should ask them if they have institutionalized the teaching of this subject.
Okay, so it is now integrated into the curriculum of the veterinary science course. How about Dr. Michele? You have any
Yeah.
idea?
Sure, at least postgraduate level, there are so many different offers, masters in One Health or public health. I take this opportunity to advertise for one,
Okay.
the master
Yes,
course
sure.
where I'm teaching with the University of Kasetsart, coordinated by CIRAD, which is called Inter-Risk. And we've
Interest.
got one module which is really dedicated to One Health, EcoHealth. But the whole teaching is about One Health approaches. So it's ecology, it's actually epidemiology, but also social sciences. And apart from that, I know that there are many other masters or other curricula that would be teaching One Health.
Okay, thank you for that information, Michele. I think this one is also, I think you can also answer this question. There are a number of multiple causes of disease emergence. So she has a lot of questions. This one is from Maribic Barcelano. First question, what triggers the presence of these pathogens?
That's a very good point. And you must be specific because there are a number of scales at which you can identify some drivers for emerging diseases. So that's why I was calling for a definition that is very precise and may be done at the relevant scale. If you're talking about the spread between countries, for instance, has happened for COVID-19 and for other SARS emergencies, you have to look at the drivers, which may be globalization, exchanges of people, and the exchanges of goods, which are some of the determinants, socio-economic determinants at that scale. But if you look at the phenomenon of disease spillover from wildlife, this may be happening at a different level, much more local, where all these spillovers, exchanges of pathogens between wildlife, livestock, humans happen. So that's at a different level. So there are multiple causes for emergence of pathogens, but your answer would depend on what scale you are considering them.
The follow-up question is, what are the major effects of these emerging diseases on our wildlife?
That's a very good point. I was very interested, of course, with a presentation by Dr. Ronnie for the ASF. But for instance, one of our worries from the conservation point of view is African swine fever, for instance, which is emerging definitely in domestic pigs. What are the effects on the wild boar population and the wild pig population? For instance, Philippines have got an incredible diversity of endemic pig species. Well, we don't really know whether they will be affected by the ASF. Maybe that could have very serious consequences for conservation. And in other parts of Asia, the role of wild boar in the spread and transmission of the disease of the virus is unknown mostly. And that's one of the questions. That's why I think ASF would be an excellent case study for One Health integrated approaches. First, it's not a zoonotic disease, but it has some consequences, direct consequences on the people through economic impact, through the changes in behavior. And the second thing is that it allows also integrated management of biodiversity environment and livestock production.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Michele. This one is for Dr. Ronnie Domingo. How does Sir Ronnie? Yep. How does OneHealth approach support high productivity targets in a commercial livestock farm?
You know, in a commercial farming, you don't only need the animal husbandry graduates or the veterinarians to produce a successful company. You have to have very good finance managers. You have to include a very good HR department, which can handle the concerns of the personnel. You also need very good marketing managers so that you can promote your products. And sometimes you also need to have good community organizers. Because if you have a commercial farm, you should see to it that you are in good relationship with villagers around you. You know what they are doing, and you can identify if there are prevailing diseases around you, so that the veterinary division of that farm can readily respond to such a situation. From our field reports, you know, the outbreaks that happened in commercial farms were brought in by individuals coming from the surrounding villages. And these are farm workers hired from these surrounding areas. And so you are doing a good operation inside, but if you are going to ignore this OneHealth approach, your accomplishments can be ruined in a matter of days. Thank you.
There's another question here for you, Director Domingo. Is there an ongoing study about the native pig population in the Philippines? And do we have data in terms of its current status, population, and distribution from one of our Zoom online viewers?
Incidentally, the Bureau of Animal Industry, we maintain an office in Chaong, Quezon. We call it the National Swine and Poultry Research and Development Center. And this is good news for you. For the swine research, the focus is on the development of the native animals, including native pigs. So we are collecting native pigs from different regions and studying their production performance and purifying the good performing animals. So yes, the answer is yes, we are studying the native pig population in the Philippines. I just don't know if we have now a completed research on the distribution in the whole country. But that's a good point. We can consider that, and I will list that issue and forward that message to my center chief.
Thank you, Dr. Domingo. Back to you, Michele. This one, I think, is a question for Aurelie, but she's not here to answer the question. So here it is. In the living labs, are the citizens within the territory aware that they are part of a larger study? Will this affect the overall analysis of the research? Michele?
That's a very good point. One critical point in the living lab perspective is how you involve people, which stakeholder you invite to participate, and to very be clear what is their role and in what why they are participating as citizens, as stakeholders, as technicians. So that's one of the challenges. And we make it very clear when we establish the arena, when we present the program, that everyone is aware of what they are doing. And the second point is really to make sure that these scales at which one living lab at a local scale would be participating and informing what is happening at a different level is clearly explicit. But it doesn't mean that local participants at local level will also directly participate at the living lab at the higher level.
There's another question here for you, Michele. from Jeanette Razo. We're all trying to adjust ourselves to a new world. Suddenly, we're amidst a global pandemic and economic contraction, and immediately concerned about our families and communities and our future. But as our perspectives are narrowed by the urgency of the COVID-19, our other big challenges, especially climate change, have not gone away. How can we maximize our communication opportunities to elevate the OneHealth voice on climate change? Michele.
I try to answer briefly. That's a very good and very burning hot question.
Yes,
I try to handle through the chat. To me, clearly, there is one key aspect, which is increasing the communication. And probably that requires having a more targeted communication for the different, especially with engage the dialogue with policymakers. I think currently a lot of One Health concepts are actually endorsed by even the general public or technical people, but there may be a need to make sure that it is now actually embedded in the policies and the governance system. I pointed out that at international level, I think it needs to be much more balanced in terms of the different components and with more input from ecology, biodiversity stakeholders. So clearly, communication, but also making sure that we change the practices to make sure that this interdisciplinarity, intersectorial collaboration really happens on the ground. So that's a very big work ahead, but I think that's necessary at that stage.
It is. I agree with you, Michele. So back to you, Sir Ronnie.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Okay, so this one is from Merly Palakpak. How will the Bureau of Animal Industry address the practice of using kanin baboy for backyard growing when you have pointed out that it is a source of the virus?
Yes, the quick answer, we should adopt the One Health approach.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, and there are several, actually, there are several recommendations already being presented to us by the private stakeholders. One, the commercial feed raisers will design a feed formulation that is relatively cheaper and saleable to the backyard raisers. Second, and we are doing this already, we are organizing the farmers into cooperatives, and for this year, I think we have released allotted a budget of 50 million for the construction of local feed mills. So through the project, we expect we should be able to bring down the cost of the feeds so that the farmer can buy this inputs, farm inputs. And of course, the big aspect of this program should be on the education of our farmers. They should be convinced that swill feeding is indeed very risky and dangerous. You know, this is from our experience, it's not easy to say, let's do IEC, educate the farmers. They have to be convinced, and the way, the effectiveness of this program should change the behavior of the farmers. In many cases, we didn't see that. So please help us.
Okay, so are you advising not to practice swill feeding?
Yes, during this period of so many ASF outbreaks in different parts of the country, we would always recommend not to use swill feeding.
Okay, so for backyard farming, there's a question here on what will be your recommended feeding that is not expensive?
You know, in our National Swine Research Center, we have plant-based materials for feeding native pigs. You know? And I can remember my chief saying to me they are propagating trichantera.
Oh, yes.
Madre de
De cacao.
Madre de Agua, something like that. Ano?
Something like this.
You don't need to buy commercial feeds. You just plant these materials and you have feed supply for your animals.
Okay, for Michele, given that diseases have already been affecting us now, how can we use One Health approach to better recover and achieve resilience?
That's a good point. There have been disease spillover. Pathogens have been transferred from wildlife to livestock to human for for a very long time. So what is the point? Well, the thing is that if we adopt these approaches, it's both to try to recover from some of these impacts after terrible situations like the crisis and the COVID, but also to make sure that we can anticipate and try to mitigate the future emergence. That's the whole idea of increasing the socio-ecosystem health, the resilience of the whole system, so that we are better prepared. We are actually decreasing the risk of environmental or health risk in the future. So it's still very relevant to try to adopt these approaches in the long term, because it's not only dealing with crisis, but it's also preparing long-term and mid-term adaptation and resilience to the forthcoming events. There will be other emergencies in the future, but maybe we can be better prepared or we can cope more efficiently if we have adopted these kind of approaches.
Okay, thank you, Michele. We can only accommodate 2 more questions. We're running out of time. So this one is from Jeanette Katipon for Dr. Domingo. You have mentioned that African swine fever does not affect human. In reality, ASF caused somehow paranoia to some people, especially to animal racers. How far or level of action has been taken by the agri-industry in dealing on this, aside from its economic effect?
You have a very good observation. You know, we recorded around 300,000 pigs depopulated because of the ASF problem. You know? And we received reports from the field that because of the paranoia, because of the fear, the farmers started early harvesting of their animals. That's why today you are seeing news articles about increasing pork prices and problems with supply, especially in central Luzon. No? So we can only do what we can do. We are assisting the traders and the producers to bring their animals, especially those from the distant places with no ASF cases. We are encouraging them to ship their animals to the urban areas where these pork products are needed. And for the psychological impact of the problem, I think we are not equipped to do that, and we need our workers, and especially those embracing this One Health approach to help us in this area. You know, if you lose one head of pig in the Philippines, that might cost around 10 to 20,000. But if you have a piggery of 100 to 500 animals, that would surely cost sleepless nights and
Yes.
I don't know. So please help us.
Okay, very well said, Dr. Domingo. So we still have a lot of questions lined up, but as I've said, we're running out of time, and these are all the questions that we could entertain at this time. Rest assured that for all our online viewers who have posted your questions, we will forward them to Michele, to Dr. Domingo, and to Aurelie, and we hope that they will be able to address them as soon as possible. But before we end this webinar, may I request for last words or parting words or takeaway message from both of you. Michele.
The takeaway message, I think, was actually really addressed through the last question that we said. The question was, well, what's the point with adopting One Health? You know, we already are suffering from these emerging diseases. Well, I think that's exactly the point, is that adopting the One Health perspective and trying to improve not only the components of the health of the people, of the animals, and the environment, but also addressing the whole resilience of the whole system, is not just to address the current crisis, but it's also to pave the way for a better mitigation, a better management of the forthcoming risk that are associated with emerging diseases, but also other health problems and environmental problems. So that's also relevant for climate change. And that's why I really think that the take-home message is, well, One Health, especially in the socio-ecosystem health dimension, is still relevant, and I think we must make sure we apply it.
Thank you, Michele. How about you, Dr. Ronnie?
To our listeners, we are facing a crisis, and this is the season that we should understand each other and be united. And let's convert this understanding and unity into actions, so that we would be able to come out of this crisis as one strong nation. And as a representative of the Department of Agriculture, we would like to assure you that we remain committed to our vision of seeing a food-secure Philippines with prosperous farmers. Good morning.
Yes, good morning to you too. So again, with SEARCA, led by our director, Dr. Glenn B. Gregorio, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to all our speakers this morning, namely Michele, Aurelie, and Director Domingo. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and thank you for sharing with us your valuable knowledge and insights. So again, my question is, can we create a pandemic-free world? And the answer is there is no assurance, but our speakers today have shown us that the current COVID-19 health crisis is a reminder for all of us of how exposed and vulnerable we are to the emergence of new diseases, as well as the risks posed by the global challenges that we face today. Dr. Binot pointed out in her presentation earlier that this COVID-19 crisis calls for a fresh look at the interdependencies between the environment and societies. It is not enough that we are able to describe, to articulate, and understand these linkages, but between animal, human, and the environment. But we should also take into account that the health sector can no longer be considered independently of agriculture and or the environment to prevent future health crises. So that ends our webinar this morning. But before we close, please let us know what you think about this webinar by clicking on the quick feedback form, which will take you just a minute to accomplish. If you registered via Zoom, you will be redirected to the feedback form before you leave the webinar room. So your feedback is important to us to help us improve the webinar. For those who wish to receive an e-certificate for participating in today's webinar, please visit the link shown on your screen. Please note that we will only accommodate requests for e-certificates within 24 hours after the end of this webinar session. I repeat, we will only accommodate requests for e-certificates within 24 hours after this webinar. We would also like to inform everyone that we issue more than 100 e-certificates after each webinar. Kindly wait for your e-certificate to be issued within 10 working days. 10 working days. So thank you for your understanding and patience. Please join us again for the continuation of this OneHealth EcoHealth webinar series on Wednesday, July 8th at 10 in the morning. This will be our third and last part of the Solve session on One Health and planetary health. Stay tuned for our forthcoming webinar series on youth in agricultural and rural development, where we have invited youth agripreneurs and champions of ARD in our online conversations. At this point, we at SEARCA are all excited and happy to inform you that we're only 1 week away from the full launch of our 11th five-year plan, because CIRCA operates on five-year plans. So where CIRCA sets its sights on accelerating transformation through agricultural innovation, or ATTAIN. So please stay tuned for more details through our CIRCA Facebook page. Let us help one another get through this COVID-19 pandemic. We hope that as we go along, we will be able to create a community of better, bigger, and smarter farmers and farming families. This is Kim Bantayan of CIRCA. Stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you very much, everyone.